Good evening. We are glad to have you with us tonight for our July 2021 Acting for Justice presentation. My name is Leila Oakley, and I serve on the staff of JustFaith Ministries, and we are delighted to have you here with us. I'd like to start by highlighting that 2021 is JustFaith Ministries' 20th anniversary. What began as one program called JustFaith has evolved into an organization with more than a dozen programs on an array of topics from hunger to racial justice to climate change to spirituality, all supporting the work and the growth of social justice across the country. Over 65,000 people have participated in our programs, and the impact is that many people's lives have been changed, deflected in the direction of human suffering, in the cause of seeking justice, and in the response to the cry of the earth. Those 65,000 people have almost certainly touched 1 million lives or more. We'll be celebrating our 20th anniversary in September with a series of events on the first 4 Thursdays of the month. So keep an eye out for more information to come in the coming months. Again, welcome to tonight's gathering. I'd like to begin with a prayer and to share this quote with you from Gandhi to start. Anyone who says they are not interested in politics is like a drowning person who insists they are not interested in water. Let us pray. Dear God of wisdom, what is our prayer today? Is it the long list of our family and friends who need your spiritual attention? Is it the long list of poor and hungry in the world who need your mercy? Is it for ourselves that we may work through our stress and struggles and find relief? Is it for ourselves that we may know better how to do your work in this world? Is it to find our passion? Is it to know true love? Is it to know true suffering? Is it for our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our spouses, that they may see your light shining upon them? Is it for hope in this world of violence, hunger, and despair? Is it for peace in a never-ending era of war and death? Is it in thanksgiving for the beautiful life you have shared with us? Is it the joy for the sun, the rain, the moon, and stars? What is our prayer today, dear God? Some days it seems that there is so much to pray for that we're overwhelmed. How do we choose? We ask for the Spirit to guide us. We ask for the signs of the day to lead us. We ask for assurance to know that whatever we pray, it matters. We know your presence is with us. We know that prayer is powerful. We know your heart is listening to ours. We know that you are gently guiding us. To pray this prayer and to be mindful of Spirit, we know you are here. What is our prayer today, dear God? This is our prayer today, to be with you, to be with the Spirit, and to be heard. With many thanks for your guiding love, we pray. Amen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight's presenter, Dr. Louis Brogdon. Dr. Brogdon is the director of the Institute for Black Church Studies and research professor of preaching and Black church studies at Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. He has served in numerous positions in undergraduate and graduate institutions as a professor and administrator. Dr. Brogdon is also the author of several books, including A Companion to Philemon, The Spirituality of Black Preaching, and No Longer a Slave, but a Brother. He is also a consultant on the JustFaith Ministries Racial Justice series. He is an ordained minister of 26 years and has pastored churches in Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. Dr. Brogdon, as always, we are delighted to have you with us again this evening.
Thank you, Layla. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. We have friends from all over these United States of America. Thank you for joining us tonight for a very, very important conversation that I believe is not only needed in this hour in which we find ourselves, but I think you're going to learn some things tonight that's going to give some context to all that is swirling around us. And when we gain the kind of insight and context that I believe God wants us to have about this particular moment, then the question is going to be for each and every one of you is, what are you going to do about it? And so before I share my screen and we hit the ground running, I've tried to practice to make sure, I got my timing down for each set of slides because, I'm the kind of professor, I like to over prepare. So I got more slides than I even have time for, but that's always a good problem to have than to find out that there's not enough prep and you're like, oh, my time is up and my slides are done. But if you were to study the writings of the prophets in the Old Testament, you will notice a particular formula that they will use. A prophet will say that the word of the Lord came to him and will give very, very specific information about when that word came to them. They will name a specific king, the exact year the king was on the throne. Sometimes even adding information, it'll tell you it was a certain amount of years before a great earthquake. And why would prophets do that? Why would they open their writing saying, God gave me a word at such a specific time? Well, the reason is because God's word and revelation and insight, it has a contextual dimension. We have to understand the times in which we find ourselves so that we can craft a word not only for ourselves and our churches, our communities, but for the broader world around us. And so as a religious scholar, it is my job to help you to understand all that is going on around us. Because one of the things that really surprises me is the crisis in imagination rooted in this crisis of perspective. We don't have the right perspective on a lot of the things that's going on around us. And so God has been stirring my spirit for quite some time, and I have been doing research and writing and thinking about all of this for quite some time, and wrote an op-ed that is now, spanning the nation. So I'm going to start sharing my screen so that we can hit the ground running. I'm excited. You're going to learn some good stuff on tonight. And I cannot thank my friends at JustFaith Ministries enough for this wonderful opportunity to be able to share with a national audience this message that is near and dear to my heart. And tonight I'm going to be talking about the fight for the soul of America, the fight for the soul of America. And before I get into the presentation, if you're interested in reading the op-ed, I just want to tell you how to, where you can go to find it, how to access it, etc. So it came out in the Courier Journal in early June. First, it came out online, I think around the 3rd, and then on Sunday it was front page in the forum section. So it's pretty cool. A poor kid from the projects sees a little picture of himself, in a newspaper in one of the cities in the United States of America. So it's a wonderful thing. I have my copy. And so you can just go to Courier Journal and put my name in and it'll come up. And you may have to register, but the access will be free. So you'll be able to access it for free. Another iteration of the same article was just released yesterday in Black Politics Today magazine. I have a column in Black Politics Today called The Black Pulpit in the Public Square. And so, it came out yesterday. It looks fantastic. It has also been picked up by other newspapers in various parts of the country. So a simple Google search will just show you some of the other papers that have picked it up and they're running it in their communities. Now, there's a lot more that I had to say about what's going on in this country than I could really fit into an op-ed. An op-ed is a very, very short piece of writing. And I'm a little long-winded. I wrote a PhD dissertation that was probably about over 230 pages, and then had already had another 200-page manuscript. I had two versions of a dissertation. I could have went either way. So that way, once I published my dissertation, I already had an early book already in the hopper. So I'm a little long-winded. I come from the Black church Pentecostal kind of context. And, you know, when we preach and teach, you know, it's not 5 or 10 minutes. In my younger days, I would never do this now because some of you are like, I'll never invite him to speak at my church. But in my younger days, I've accidentally like preached for an hour. I would never do that now, but you know, I was young and I had to tell everybody everything I knew. I had to get it all out. But I have a lot more to say. I wrote a protracted, extended article that you can find on the website of the Institute. I'm a professor at the Baptist Seminary of Kentucky. We have a campus, both presence on the campus of Georgetown College and Simmons College of Kentucky. And so I'm on the Simmons side in the city of Louisville. We've just launched an exciting new national institute that I have the wonderful opportunity to serve as the director. You can just put in institute.bsk.edu, take you right to the website, and you will see I have all of my articles that's in my column, The Black Pulpit in the Public Square. You can read all of my articles. And so tonight's presentation is really going to be based on the more protracted, extended work that I have done, because I could only sort of deal with some of the major issues in the op-ed. It's the extended piece. One of my favorite writings is the letter from a Birmingham jail. Everyone's like, oh, you know, when you think of Dr. King, they always want to talk about, I have a dream speech. But if you want to get into the genius of King's thinking, you need to read the letter from a Birmingham jail. So I always tell my friends when they want to learn something about Dr. King, I'll shy them away from the I have a dream speech. I says, no, read the letter from a Birmingham jail. I wrote my dissertation on Paul's letter to Philemon. Paul wrote the letter while he was in prison. And so in the Christian tradition, wonderful pieces of writing come out of hard places, like in prison. And so this extended article to me is sort of in this tradition of wisdom that is coming during a tough time and from a hard place. And I'm not going to say that not personally, but nationally where we are. And so I want to encourage you to take some time to read this extended article. I open up the article and I just want to talk about some points in the op-ed, and then I'm going to make about 4 different moves. First, I'm just going to introduce why I wrote an op-ed on the fight for the soul of America. And then I want to unpack sort of 4 key components of this problem. And in that last part, I'm really going to be ending with a sort of national call to action that I issued in the op-ed. I was just surprised to hear at the time someone, Joe Biden, who was running for president, invoking moral language. Now, as a religious scholar, whether it is in movies, television shows, politics, when people are invoking biblical and moral and religious language, well, that's my job to pay attention to that. And it was striking that going all the way back to 2017, Biden was noticing that there was just something different going on in America. And he started to use this language of a fight for the soul of America, fight for the soul of this nation. Now, he's not the first president to sort of look around and say, wait a minute, there's some other things going on in this country. And they try to speak to that. If you read Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, I mean, he did more than just give a presidential speech. He was trying to offer in his way as a political leader some moral leadership. And so I really thought that in a sense, Biden was trying to do that. And so this language he was using of a battle for the soul of this nation, he was talking about our troubled national character because, there's a historian, John Meacham, who made the comment that, when Biden says this is a battle for the soul of the nation, he's not using it religiously, but as a synonym for character. And I have to chuckle a little bit under my breath, but sure, because of course, Biden is not thinking about, he was thinking about the election. But I believe there is something very religious, something spiritual, and something moral about this language. In fact, this language comes from the Bible. It comes from the writings of the New Testament. Jesus talked about, losing your soul in the Gospels. So then what I wanted to do in the op-ed, and it's in the extended one, is to help you to understand that while Joe Biden is talking about the character of America, and this is where I'm going to end, that we need to have some serious conversations about our national character. I want us to make sure that we understand what we mean by invoking this language about we're in a fight for the soul of this nation. Because in the New Testament tradition, and Jesus made this reference, you can find it in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where it says, what will it profit you if you gain the whole world and lose your soul or you lose yourself? Now, in conservative fundamentalists, in churches, they'll tell you, you lose your soul, that means you're going to hell. All right, now, Jesus was not talking about people going to hell. He was talking about what happens to them in life. So when you're talking about the soul, the Greek word suke, it's the innermost part of your being. It's really who you are at the core. And who you are at the core, you are in a struggle to be your sort of best self. So in the Markan passage in Mark chapter 8, Jesus is saying, if you try to save your life, you're going to lose it. But if you want to lose your life, then you will ultimately save it. What he is doing is he is talking about you will lose yourself depending on the kind of path you take in life. And Jesus is not just talking to an individual person. He's saying if anyone wants to follow after me, in other words, Jesus is talking, this is communal language. For all who want me, they have to deny self, take up their cross, follow me daily. So it's important that you understand, what does it mean to lose your soul? I think what it means is you lose out on the struggle to be your best self. So as a country, we're losing in this struggle to be the best that we can be. Now, I had a couple friends who read early versions of the extended op-ed, and their retort was, America never had a soul. If you know anything about America's history, we built this country on the genocide of Native Americans and the enslavement of Africans. America never had a soul. Well, let's go back to the language of the biblical text. The language in the text is not about whether you have a soul or not. The language is about where you stand in the struggle to be either the best or the worst. Okay, if you take that lesser path, you are going to lose yourself in the process. If you take the self-sacrificial path, you're going to save yourself. We're going to save ourselves taking that better path. So then if the conversation is not about did America ever have a soul, I think that's a wrong-headed response. The response is, well, I think we see evidence that America has always tried to struggle with its soul. Yes, we have this history of enslavement, but you would have a movement like the abolitionist movement. There is a war that gets fought. There's, movements like women's suffrage, civil rights. Today, we even have movements like Black Lives Matter. I think as a nation, there's always kind of been this struggle for us trying to be better. This is why we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in this country, because he called us to be better than we were. So I wrote the op-ed because today I think we're losing ground. And there's this kind of embrace of the worst of ourselves that has gained a real foothold in this nation. So this is why this language of fighting for the soul of America is so important, because there's less will now nationally to struggle to be better. There is this embrace to let's just be this way. And I'm going to unpack the crisis here. So so the first move is to just kind of help you to understand that there's a lot going on in this country, particularly the past 2 years. We know we just, and we're still dealing with the fallout from the coronavirus. We've lived through a global pandemic. Last summer was a very, very hot, very, very controversial, very, very difficult time in this country, where you had tragic murders, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, right here in the city of Louisville, George Floyd. There were protests for George Floyd's murder in Germany, the largest protest that Germany has had in the past 50 years. They had last summer over the murder of George Floyd. It was a hot time. And in the city of Louisville, you had militia groups squaring off in our streets. Protests all over the nation. I mean, a lot was happening. And we got to December the 31st, and everybody was like, phew, 2020 is over. I mean, it was a tough year. I mean, so many people dying. I mean, just if something bad could happen, it was like it was happening in 2020. And we just kind of thought, once we get out of 2020, 2021 is going to be better. And, oh, wait a minute. We went back to mass shootings. And then on the 6th of January, you had what happened at the Capitol. And so in the op-ed, I noted that America's in crisis. A global pandemic, record unemployment, protests over police brutality, riots in multiple cities, and the attack on the Capitol building by U.S. citizens at the beckon of the outgoing president. America is being exposed in troubling ways, laid out in a graphic that I'm going to show you here in just a few moments. There has been a national conversation going on for quite some time that there's something wrong in this country, that there's something deeply wrong. And we're just kind of going our way and we've normalized a lot of this. We've just adjusted ourselves as if this is okay. But there have been some people who have been writing and conducting research, and they've been raising concerns that there's something wrong. The cover of the Atlantic, was talking about how to stop a civil war. And Jeff Goldberg's essay entitled "A Nation Coming Apart," he says, we don't believe the conditions in the U.S. today resemble those of the 1850s, but we worry that the ties that bind us are fraying at an alarming speed. We are becoming contemptuous of each other in ways that are both dire and possibly irreversible. And this is not, you're getting political. There are people in politics who are saying something is wrong. Senator Ben Sasse wrote a book called Them, Why We Hate Each Other, back in 2017. Ben Sasse was trying, so you even have people on both sides of the aisle recognizing that, wait a minute, there's a little something different going on in this country. And it's interesting that Sasse wrote that book around the same time, Biden put out a very long op-ed after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville that resulted in the death of someone. Okay, so as far back as 2017, you had people, whether they're in journalism or politics, starting to say, wait a minute, there's something going wrong in this country. Rolling Stone heralds the unraveling of America. You ought to just do a Google search and read that article. But what it shows is that COVID-19 wasn't just a pandemic that attacked our physical bodies. It completely exposed us as a country. The essay noted that pandemics have a way of shifting the course of history. And it's not always immediately evident. So even though we think the pandemic is over, it's going to take us years to unpack and to understand all that transpired. Because the COVID-19 really exposed this country. And that's why you heard a lot of the language of some people talking about, you know, we have the global pandemic, and then we have the pandemic of racism. Well, I believe it's a little more complicated than that. The Washington Post, you know, they talked about the collapse of American exceptionalism. Very, very interesting research and data where Dr. Shermer, who's a history professor in Chicago, noted that since 1968, there's just been cycles of recessions, widening inequality, debt, and disenfranchisement. And we did a good job of hiding it, insulating people from what was really going on in this country. But what the coronavirus did is it just completely exposed all of these things about the country. This is why I like to use this graphic. We're in what I believe is a cultural revolution. We're in this era of great social upheaval with deep, deep social rifts. So on the left, on my left, which would be probably to your right, you will notice the COVID-19 is in orange, because it's the thing that really exposed these deeper problems we have in this country. Problems with our political system, that there is dysfunction and gridlock. Okay. With the system. Because when it was time for the system to work for the people, it was not responsive. And people died, people lost jobs, and millions and probably billions of dollars were lost because of dysfunction and gridlock. The coronavirus exposed just how entrenched racism and xenophobia is in this country. Who was dying from COVID-19? Black and brown people were the ones dying because of other health issues that's a part of what? Gross economic disparities and mass poverty. Our infrastructure was shown to be weak when it was time we couldn't test. We didn't have the infrastructure to test Americans. We didn't have the infrastructure to then widely disseminate the vaccine. And then when we got on the other side of COVID-19, we had an attack on our infrastructure from Russia that shut down all throughout the southeastern corridor, because our infrastructure is so weak. While we're fussing and fighting and arguing with each other, we're very, very vulnerable as a country. And then there is this sort of deeper problem we have that's philosophical and religious in nature, a collapse of meaning that we are dealing with in 2021. So this is why I argue in my op-ed that America is losing its soul. But I wrote not just to say, oh, we're losing our soul and that's the end of the story. I wrote for us to say, okay, these things are happening. There's a national conversation. And I believe because these things are happening and there's this national conversation, this is why you get someone who's running for president and then becomes the president using this language about we're in a fight for the soul of this nation. And the fight didn't end when he won the election. He was thinking about the election. I think it's more broadly. I think we are still in a fight for our soul today. And so I'm writing to give voice to that. But if we're going to go in a different direction in this country, we need to look, I think, a little deeper. And this is why, as a religious scholar and a religious leader, I'm able to bring a kind of perspective to these things that someone in politics can't necessarily bring. So standing in the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. tradition, I get to probe a little deeper and say, yeah, we see these things going on. You can, look at this very, very wonderful. I love creating my graphics. All right. Where it just lays it out for you. But if you want to understand, there is something that flows underneath all of those. So if I could add to the graphic, I would add the following. We have a real problem in this country with hatred. I talk about it in the op-ed that hatred is the core problem fueling the American crisis. The sort of undercurrent and the consistent thread. So you can trace whether you're talking about problems we have fixing our infrastructure, problems we have with gross economic disparities. We have this problem with hatred. And I use the language of othering in the article. I says, because a lot of times people, when they hear the word hate, they're going to get all defensive. I don't hate anyone. Let's understand how something functions. Because if it functions a certain way, then that's exactly what it is. The term othering, is a softer way of talking about the problem we have with hate. I call it the new form of racism, where we categorize people so that we can justify why it's okay to mistreat, to discriminate, or to perpetuate violence against them. And that encompasses the old black-white racism that's just a part of the history of this country that we're still dealing with. But it's also hatred against other minority groups, where some of these same things that have been enacted against others, now there's a new group. They're experiencing that same kind of vitriol, that same animus. I think it's also part of our sort of tribalistic two-party system, where people think it's okay, if you're a Democrat, it's okay to hate Republicans because they are Republican. And they may not use those words, but they are literally like, I can listen to some people who are very, very progressive, and there's nothing but just disdain they have for their conservative sisters and brothers. And it's the same with how some Republicans and conservatives feel about progressives. And there's a lot of research. You ought to see the research. I talk about some of that in the extended op-ed. That some of this, what's going on with partisanism, is there is this undercurrent of hatred. And it has created a crisis in public morality. So we can't fix our infrastructure, bridge the divide, correct systemic racism until we come to grips with the problem of hate. And I want to spend a few moments digging. I just want to drill down, because there's a lot more to this than just saying, we're kind of in the habit of categorizing people so that we can then, mistreat them either in our individual behavior or at the policy level. It's okay, to enact certain policies that are going to have a negative effect on other people. That's nothing but othering. But I want you to understand how hatred functions, because most people are not going to want to believe that they are participating in hate in any kind of way. All right, because they think, well, as long as the words don't come out their mouth, then they're good. And that's not really true. So if you look at research in social psychology, anthropology, sociology, history, philosophy, theological ethics, and I'm going to share some of the studies. There are four sort of key components that I want you to understand as I sort of unpack the American crisis of hatred. What social psychologists tell us is that situational forces can influence individual behavior. Situational forces. So they're things that are just going on in society can influence how individuals behave. Hate can become socially acceptable. Okay. Depending on, if you look to the other side of the graphic, depending on what group you are in, it's the nature of groups. When you get in groups, ethicist Reinhold Niebuhr argues that you can be morally individually, but when you get in groups, oh my gosh, just we lose that. So that's how hate can become socially acceptable. You get in your group, and your group starts telling you we're this, and the other group's that, and they're different from you. They have a different belief system, different philosophy, different color of their skin, different sexual orientation, whatever it is. Then you think it's okay for people in your group to then think less, whether it's dehumanizing, whether it's them, etc. So you got to pay attention to the groups that you are in, all the groups that you are in. Because what happens is when you give in to hate, you end up becoming what you hate. It's what's referred to as the monstrous double. Research in mimesis. So Philip Zimbardo, who's a social psychologist, he was behind the famous Stanford prison experiment. If you ever heard of that, I mean, like they set up a prison system in the basement of a dorm and conducted experiments where they turned normal people, some of them into inmates, some of them were the guards, and it was an interesting study in human behavior. Because he wrote this book called The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil. Look, I got this book right here. You know, you should at least read the first 2 chapters. Okay. I mean, it's excellent because he talks about what has to happen for good people to do evil things or for good people to participate in evil. Because look at the bottom where he says, you know, most of us hide behind egocentric biases that generate the illusion that we are special. We all like to think, I couldn't hate anyone. I'm a good person. And that's, you're lying to yourself. Good people participate in evil. Good people do bad things all the time. If you're not aware of the situational forces swirling around you, you'd be surprised what you can be caught up into. So what is evil? He defines it. Behaving in ways that harm, abuse, demean, dehumanize, or destroy innocent others, or using your authority or systemic power to encourage or permit others to do so on your behalf. So Zimbardo's research is very, very important. Thurman talks about, he's writing in the Jim Crow context, the Jim Crow era. He's writing in the 1950s. He exposes how hatred can serve a sort of social function. Now, one example he gave was during times of war, that a part of a country trying to justify why it needs to declare war on somebody, you have to make someone your enemy. Okay, you have to generate reasons why we have to go and kill them and destroy them. And so he noted how, you know, in the World War II era, as he's reflecting back on that time, how easy it was for hatred to be brought out into the open, given formal dignity and a place of respectability. We hate the Nazis, okay? We hate the Italians. We hate the Japanese. And the language could be much, much stronger. And here's why. We have to destroy them. Okay, now they don't call it hate, they call it patriotism. But what it's doing is just providing moral cover for you to hate someone to justify why it's okay for millions of dollars to be spent to go kill a bunch of people. There's no escaping what that's about. He also talked about how even in groups where you have been disenfranchised, how hate can be something that you use that you think is actually constructive, but it's not. And he warned African Americans against the trap of hatred because it sucks you in. And this is why today, when we don't have leaders like King, when we don't have leaders like Thurman, we have leaders even in the Black community who are encouraging hatred towards whites, hatred towards other people. And it's gaining a lot of support. Well, wow, I hate every police officer. I mean, wait a minute. Now, there are some bad police officers, but see, hate doesn't want to parse and nuance because you can't really control it. Niebuhr talks about when we get in groups, there's less of a check on impulse, less capacity for self-transcendence, less ability to comprehend the needs of others. Groups are about self-interest, sustaining themselves. So of course, they're going to always be looking out for themselves. This is part of the problem we have with our political system. They're always looking out for themselves. And then Rene Girard talks about this, what's called the Monstrous Double. If you're not careful, you become the thing that you hate. This is the most interesting thing. Whether we're on one side or the other, when you employ hate, it becomes very, very difficult to distinguish what you really stand for and who you really are. You ultimately become the thing you are fighting against. He says, as rivalry and combativeness between individuals or groups intensifies, characteristics that previously distinguished them begin to dissolve. When this happens, antagonists effectively become doubles of each other. Now, friends, is exactly what is happening in this country. Many of us, we believe, we like to use this term, righteous indignation. This is, I've got God's anger. Well, I don't think that's God's. I think, no, that's your anger. That's your group's anger. And mistaking your group's anger for God's anger is dangerous. And that's the trap of hatred. This is why folks like King, they warned us about this stuff. King says, let no man pull you so low as to hate him. Don't let anyone, I don't care what they stand for. You have to be careful that you don't give in to hate. And look at that language he's using, pull you low. This is why King, insisted on moving with dignity. Because when you give in to violence, when you give in to hate, you just end up with the endless reign of meaningless chaos. Look at what is playing itself out in this country. Nothing but chaos. Because somehow we think giving in to hate is going to lead us somewhere constructive. It's not. King says you can't meet hate with retaliatory hate. All it does is intensifies the existence of evil in the universe. But this is how people think. This is how they act on social media, which is one of the reasons I'm not on. Because people get on there and all they do is just drum up more evil, drum up more antagonism, more negativity in the universe. Hate begets hate. Violence begets violence. King says we must meet the forces of hate with the power of love. We must meet physical force with our soul free. Others have commented on this. Even Nietzsche, who's an atheist, argues that if you fight monsters, you better be careful that in the process, you do not become one. You always become the thing you fight the most. I mean, these are sober warnings. Walter Wink says, as long as we hate something, we only draw it to ourselves. So let's draw some implications before I shift gears. There are powerful situational forces at play right now in our country. And you need to be careful. You need to be careful of the forces that are influencing how you're acting, how you're thinking. because some of the stuff you're doing, some of the ways you're thinking, there are forces that's influencing you, and they're influencing you in negative ways. And you need to pump the brakes, take a step back and say, wait a minute, what's going on? That's what I'm trying to do in the op-ed, to help people kind of understand what's going on. Because then once we understand there are these powerful situational forces, then we have to start being honest about the groups that we are in, and to understand when I get in groups, there's going to be a tendency to justify things in my groups that I would never do in my personal life. Okay. So instead of, in the sort of Matthew 7 tradition, where Jesus is highlighting the hypocrisy of saying you have a telephone pole coming out of your eye, and a speck of dust in your eye, not knowing that you have this huge telephone pole in your own eye. We are obsessed with what is wrong with everyone else except really ourselves. So we have to look at our groups. Every group that we are in is going to have unique temptations, which is why the model prayer says, and lead us not into temptation. It doesn't say lead me, it's lead us, because that's a communal thing. The temptation is always what we do when we get in groups, because when we get in groups, we perpetuate forms of evil that have a devastating effect on people. So I wrote the op-ed to kind of open our eyes that there are these bigger forces in play. Because if you're not careful with hate, you become what you hate. And so there's a deeper message in the Christian tradition that I'm trying to lift up. And this danger, becoming what you hate, is real, and it is happening. This is why Jesus, other leaders like Gandhi, King, Tutu, they developed radical yet sophisticated responses to systemic oppression to prevent this from happening. And they were clear, you should resist oppression, that you should take up work in the world, make the world a better place. No one is telling you don't get involved in that. No, yes, absolutely. Absolutely resist. But you can't use hate. You can't use anything evil trying to do the good work, or you just become the thing that you're fighting against. And we need more leaders who are saying, people, yes, do this work, but there's a way you're supposed to do it. And the reason we are in this sort of pickle, I'm gonna wrap up, I got 5 minutes, is because of where we are with the church. We have a real crisis, not only with hatred in this country, but with the leaders and the organizations and institutions that are supposed to provide sight, they're actually blind. And, in Revelation chapter 3, the final letter Jesus sent to one of those churches was a church called Laodicea. And it was a wealthy church, kind of like America. It's a church where they thought they had it going on. But Jesus' assessment of that church was devastating. No, he said, actually, this church has a lot of problems. So you ought to read Revelation chapter 3, that last, I think maybe around 11 through the end, where he's very, very critical to this church. And what this message, the reason it's important is because it shows churches can have a misguided and inaccurate assessment of itself. Churches can think, oh, everything's great, we're fine. And that's not true. They can be spiritually and morally bankrupt. Jesus told this church, yeah, you're materially rich. He says, but you're poor. You're poor. I think that's a parable of American Christianity. And not only was the church poor, when you're poor, I mean, that's where we use this language of being bankrupt. They were blind. They didn't even see their condition. And not only were they blind, but they were out of fellowship with Jesus. It's the whole irony of Revelation 3. We created this whole, based on verse 20, with Jesus standing on the door knocking. We've used that as this altar call kind of thing where people, you want Jesus to come into your heart. That's not what Jesus was talking about. in Revelation 3, Jesus was saying, I'm not even in this church. I'm outside this church. I'm knocking on the door. And they're in there having church and doing their thing. Jesus has nothing to do with it. Okay. So he said, you know, when y'all want to really be the church, open up the door and let me in, and I will come in. So here they are doing their thing. And the organizing presence, God, and spirit of the church was not even there, and they didn't even know it. And that's where we are. Dr. King warned for the church not to become the puppet of the state, and that's what has happened. So part of American Christianity in crisis is that we have become the puppet of the state instead of its conscience, instead of its guide. We're so pleased to just be, to get some attention from some of these political leaders instead of understanding, no, it's not our job to just be happy that we're in the room, but to make sure that they are enacting policies that's going to be in the best interest of everyone. We bring the great teachings of our religion to bear on our public life so that we can live in a land where everyone can thrive because everyone's God's children, not just the people in your little group. And so there's been lots of studies done on things that are deeply wrong with Christianity in America. I'll make sure you get a list of those. Jesus commented, if the blind leads the blind, they both end up in a pit, and that's where we are. So I end with my call to action. One of the things Dr. King taught us was not just, I have a dream, but to pay attention, to think of morality in terms of the kind of nation we have been. This is why Dr. King talked about slavery, because you can't lie about the kind of nation we have been. But he also lifted up the kind of nation we can be. He was always calling us to something better. So anytime we talk about morality in this country, we're always thinking about just personal morality. No, we need to start thinking about morality in the kind of nation that we are. What are we doing with these kinds of gross economic disparities where people are living destitute, with the criminal justice system in the shape that it's in? So I'm calling on all citizens to have honest conversations about the character of this nation that I hope is going to lead to some kind of movement. I've already started asking government officials to issue special calls to their respective states and to the nation. Folks in Frankfort here in the state of Kentucky have already started to heed the call, and we're going to be working on having town halls all over the state of Kentucky. I've reached out to the White House even, and I hope that they will be responsive as well. The media needs to get involved. I would love to see a whole new set of public service announcements that are teaching different values, ways for us to learn how to be civil and how to be good neighbors with each other in spite of our differences. And for churches to be involved as well, whether it's pastors preaching and teaching on the church's role in the public square, you name it, we need to be about this kind of work. I'll leave those questions. I'll make sure you get some of those questions. But the one I want to point out is number 4 and number 5. Is it too late for America to be better, or do we have time to address our character? And then the 5th one is, what role should faith leaders and faith-based organizations play? And with that said, this October, JustFaith Ministries is going to be offering a brand new module. They don't have the title for it yet, but it's going to deal with civil dialogue and nonviolent communication. And I'm going to have the wonderful opportunity to be a consultant as this is going to be developed. This is so needed. And so I want you to find some things in your community that you can do, but you also really need to think about taking this module and just taking some time to study so we can learn some different ways to talk to each other, to talk to people who are not necessarily in our groups or who see things the same way that we see. We need a lot of help learning how to make this country a better place. And I'll stop there and we'll have some time for Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Brogdon. As always, lots to chew on there. Let me get us started with a question, and then just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and send them to me, and I'll filter through them and invite Dr. Brogdon to share. But one of the things that I'm hearing regularly, and I just want to know how you would respond to this, is in this time, I'm willing to show up at the table, but the other side isn't. I'm getting that frequally. Whoever the other side is, if you're a Republican, it's the Democrat. If you're a Democrat, it's the Republican. If you're the, this, you're that, whatever the other side is, I'm willing to show up, but the other side isn't. How would you respond to that based on this call?
Well, I think in a sense that is true, because there's so much antagonism in this country. And we don't believe each other. We don't believe they're really acting in good faith. Just no willingness to sort of on the various impasses we have. So in the extended op-ed, we don't talk about forgiveness as a nation anymore. And talking about forgiveness is different than talking about reconciliation. Forgiveness in the Christian tradition means you're not allowing a slight to completely define the parameters of any sort of future engagement. And so we do need, as a country, I think we need a national conversation around the role of forgiveness, because, once we find we disagree or we differ on a particular issue, we make that the be all end all of who they are as a person. And so one of the things when Dr. King was unpacking his philosophy of nonviolence in a popular sermon, when he was talking about how to love your enemies, he said that no matter what an enemy does, that one thing never expresses the totality of who they are. So someone can disagree with you on the gun rights issue and still be a good father, a good husband. There's a lot there. So how do we find some other areas where there are some commonalities and try to nurture and build some relationship there, so that we can maybe find a different path to having conversations about some of those things that we disagree with? And I'll also tell you that the research on just how tribalistic we are in this country around political parties is we so identify with our party that it's really not so much about issues, because really when you start talking about issues, people actually agree on certain things a little bit more than they disagree on. Then they'll have some of those key points and key places where there's disagreement. But we just ignore and disregard all the places where we will agree on, and we will just fixate on those things that we disagree and then refuse to come to the table. Oh. Tutu's book says no future without forgiveness. That's a great book.
So I'm getting some good questions, and I suspect we'll have more questions than we have time for. But people are asking about a couple of the issues that are sort of at the top of this division right now, which are voting rights and critical race theory. And when you say either one of those things, it feels like to me that you immediately go with any listener. And so how do you keep people in the conversation? Or, particularly because I know you and I, Dr. Brogdon, have talked about voting rights and the need to, have vote, to address that issue. How do you engage with somebody who is maybe on the other side of those issues? How would you personally engage with somebody who's on the other side?
Well, as an African American and as an African American scholar who understands the history and the real pain there, you live with this tension. You never want to dismiss and minimize the pain and the damage that has been done. It's a very, very painful legacy in this country around around issues of race. You must also hold that in tension with the realization that, okay, at the philosophical level, when you frame an issue, see, this is a part of the problem we have in this country. Once you frame an issue a certain way, then you force other people that the only way they can have a conversation about that issue is if they accept the way you framed it. And that creates a kind of impasse. This is why we have to pay attention to the language that we use. Okay, if there is this hot term like critical race theory, most Americans have no idea what that even means. Okay, they just throw the term around. Okay, I got 10 different ways I can talk about critical race theory that doesn't even need to use the term. And probably 5 or 6 of those other people would be like, oh, well, I don't have a problem with that. It's just sometimes a term starts to take on life. And when you don't have relationships with people who are different, then it's just easy to just kind of wash your hands. But if you are invested in living in a democracy and in a diverse country with people who don't see things the same way that you see things, then you're going to have to be willing to allow for some ideological variance and difference. There are going to be people who don't see things your way. And I will have fundamental disagreements with them about, like, for example, what is happening with voting rights today. It's Jim Crow coming back. And of course, Jim Crow can come back because people don't know the history of Jim Crow. They don't know what was being done. But then I also live in a country where, these people, they don't know the history. And so they think they're acting in a vacuum, and you're going to have to learn how to extend some grace, how to continue to have conversations. Okay, well, then if they don't know about Jim Crow, then what's a different way to have a conversation about what is unjust and problematic about what is being done when it comes to some of these stringent voting laws? So this is why we need imagination, so that we can find different ways instead of continuing to have the same conversation that keeps leading us nowhere. The burden of leadership is to say, okay, well, let's have this conversation in a different way. And if a person at the end of the day says, I don't want to hear it, then, I mean, there are people who didn't agree with Jesus. But you will notice, like, for example, when the rich young ruler basically turned Jesus down, the text says Jesus looked at him and loved him. So he didn't have any animosity in his heart. Hey, he said, we will agree to disagree. Mm-hmm. And I think that's healthy for a democracy. But it's that undercurrent of hate that destroys any possibility that we can move beyond an impasse or have a future together.
Mm-hmm. So 2 more questions I think that we have time for. One is this. Can you tie in with your message how this new difficulty around truth enters into all of this? Because truth is just I make an assumption that, if I see something, it's true. Yeah. Or if I hear something, it's true. But there's all sorts of untruths, about, for example, one of my friends on Facebook shared something the other day, and it was about a certain person. And it was one of those put together memes, and it said something about this person was connected to the Nazis and da-da-da-da-da. And this person's background was actually, they were not connected to the Nazis at all. They were on the other side of there. And so anyway, it's just, but those things are promoted as if they're truths. And so how do you reconcile this call to dialogue and this ambiguity that there seems to be around that truth?
I don't know if you can reconcile it. There's what I unpacked is only a fraction of a lot of the research that's being done on all that is unfolding. What is happening around with social media, with bots, artificial intelligence, as well as breakdown in our family and community structures. Like, Ben Sass, he argues that one of the reasons people have turned to politics is because they don't know their neighbors. They don't live in communities and they don't feel connected. So we picked up these other things like social media, you know, the party we belong to. And now all of these sort of, you know, subgroupings that are being created, you know, through the use of the internet, because we are so fragmented. When you're fragmented and you don't know, you don't have neighbors, you don't know each other, then it's just easy to start latching onto things. And the reason we're really in for a pickle, which is why the graphic I showed earlier that talked about we're in this era of great social upheaval. The last one was philosophical in nature when I referred to the collapse of meaning. One of the books I wrote a book on the issue of nihilism. And people don't know what to believe today. We were concerned about radical moral relativism and the complete collapse of far back as the late 90s, and it is on display. It just looks completely differently than what we thought, where truth is always what the individual thinks it is, what their group thinks it is, and every group has a competing truth claim or a competing reality. And there's just a lot of research and work and a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen if that keeps playing itself out. I don't have the answer yet. I am currently doing some writing on how widespread nihilism is in America, because the reason people have completely abdicated for, I think, a sensible sort of moral and philosophical framework is because they live in such a fragmented world. They're suffering, they're disenfranchised, and it's easy to grab onto these things to kind of fill those deeper gaps and voids. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that'll be a future one that we'll be doing on when I finish my research, and y'all can hop back on and we can have conversations about that as well. Great question.
Yeah. We'll bring you back in a year from now, and then we'll go over that. One last question, and maybe the end on just the action-based note. You mentioned town hall meetings, and that's a call to action. That's a very practical thing. Getting a town hall meetings in place. But how might we promote building on those things we agree on? What would be some of your practical suggestions for building on those things that we agree on?
You know, a less formal approach to a town hall is, I know it's a little old fashioned. And as we're, starting to, be able to move back into our communities now that, more and more people have been vaccinated, food brings people together. How about a community picnic? You get together, you offer some food. You're not going to talk about saving the world. You're just going to get to know your neighbors. We live around people. We're just complete strangers with each other. And so what will it mean to have a picnic with people in your community, or people in your apartment building, or people who are on your floor, or maybe just somebody new, somebody different, getting to know them, sitting down and sharing a cup of coffee with someone, learning how to talk to people, learning how to build community. I tell you, these things are wonderful, but man, they have really hurt our social skills. And so learning how to go back and have those conversations. I would encourage you to think about having, a town hall in your community. Start very, very small, and the focus is only on how can we be a better country. And it's not about, what the other person needs to do, but what can I do? What am I willing to do to make America a better place for everyone? And just giving people space to talk about that. Maybe framing it differently will be, maybe we'll yield some different results. And then maybe, what we're going to do with this, with the Just Faith module is we're probably going to create some space for you to then come back in and be in conversation with us about some of those things that you are doing, whether it's in a congregation or whether it's in your community or whether it's through a nonprofit that you work for. What's working? What did you do? And how can others learn about that so that we can continue to build momentum?
Thank you so much. You're speaking my language. Food, that's easy. We can all do that, right?
Yep.
We can all eat with people.
Food, movies, yes.
Food, popcorn, and movies, yes. Dr. Brogdon, always a privilege. I can't remember if Leela said it at the beginning, but Dr. Brogdon consulted with us on our racial justice series. He's been invaluable to the development of some of our programming, and he frequently does these webinars for us. And so we're just thrilled to have your wisdom and insights again tonight, Dr. Brogdon. So thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to what our director of programs and Dr. Brogdon and another consultant that we have who has an expertise in nonviolent communication will do with the civil dialogue program that we're developing. There's 3 minds in that are, just top notch. So look for that to come out this fall, and it should be a wonderful tool as we think about making America better.
I invite you now to join me in our closing prayer by Vienna Cobb Anderson. We pray for the dreamers of this life, O God, for those persons who imagine new possibilities, who long for what others cannot perceive, who spin dreams of wonder and majesty in their mind. Defend them from ridicule and harsh criticism, from self-doubt and lack of faith in their dreams, and from abandonment of this call to make things new. Grant that from their dreams may come forth blessings for humankind to enrich the quality of life and the wonderment of us all. Amen. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you next month.